Jaemin, so good to have you on the show, mate. Thanks for joining me on Perko's podcast today. How are you doing? How are things in Goulburn, the cooler part of New South Wales? How are things this morning?
Well, look, it's a mint morning this morning. I do love running in the frost, particularly when my cheeks are burning, lungs are burning. I think it's so good. No wind, so it's a beautiful morning. Sun's out. Great start to the day.
Yeah, fantastic. You know you're truly alive when your lungs and your cheeks are burning. And your body's letting you know that you are putting in some effort, which is awesome. I love that. Well, listen, we're going to dive right in. For those that are maybe new to the podcast, our goal here is pretty simple. We want to help people reach their goals without losing their souls. And we have this kind of mantra. We say it this way: we'd love to see a generation of leaders who can, at the end of their days, say, I reached my goals, but even more important to that, they would say, it is well with my soul. That's really the key for us here at the podcast. And Jaemin, you've just released a brand new book, which I can't wait to talk about, because I actually think it tackles both of the things that we talk about on the podcast. And so before we get to that, though, we have this fun little segment, Jaemin. We call it 60 Seconds with Perko. I just have 10 either or questions, rapid fire. I'm going to go through them really quickly. You just tell me whatever comes to your mind first. So,
Great.
Number one, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Apple or PC?
Apple.
Beaches or mountains?
Mountains.
Dogs or cats?
Wolf.
Netflix or YouTube?
YouTube.
Call or text?
Call.
Podcast or music?
Podcast.
Passenger or driver?
Driver.
Saver or spender?
Spender.
Okay. And then the classic question, mate. This is the one that really can disrupt people pretty significantly. When it comes to your toilet paper roll, is it over or under for you, mate?
It's over, as it should be.
As it should be. I'm with you on that. Over as it should be. I don't know who the under people are out there, but they certainly don't have that one correct. I'm so glad you said podcast, mate. I was nervous you were about to say music, and I was going to have to interrupt and say, you're not doing us any favors here, mate. We're recording a podcast. You're not helping the industry in any way. But so you said that you're a spender. Does Catherine help balance that out? Your wife help balance that out a little bit, or not really?
Yeah. Look, we've got a really good money system. We followed the Barefoot Investor, and my mate Bryce Holdaway has the Money Smart system. So there's a few good frameworks we've developed over the years, which kind of make sure we get to have a lot of fun with our money, and there's still money in the bank. So we complement each other well. It's taken us a while to work that out, but we're good with it now.
Yeah, fantastic. I love the fact that you mentioned a couple of people there. You said the Barefoot Investor. Who was the other name that you said? Money Smart?
So Bryce Holdaway, there in Power Wealth. He runs the Property Couch podcast, and he's written a book called Make Money Simple Again.
Okay.
So some really great frameworks there.
Yeah, awesome. We'll make sure that we link to those in the show notes. Hey, tell us, for those that are not familiar, Jaemin, with your books and your podcasts, and mate, you've got a lot of content that you create, which I find really helpful. I follow almost all of it, I think. Can you tell us, though, a little bit of your background? Because you and I have known each other for a long time. I feel like I had a missed opportunity, because I knew your wife well, because she was good friends with some people that were good friends of mine. But we never really got to connect that much in those early years, 20 years ago now. And I feel like it's a missed opportunity, but I'm glad we're catching up with lost time, for lost time right now. But give us a bit of your background, mate, because you had, I would call it a bit of a traditional path, but then you took a massive turn. So tell us a little bit of your story.
So look, I was desperate to join the army when I finished school. That was my plan. I thought long and hard about what I was going to do with my life. And I thought, yep, the army's for me. I thought, look, they're going to pay for my degree. I'm going to do civil engineering in the army, and it's all going to be good. Passed all my tests. Was going to go through ADFA, and then it was 2 weeks before the final interview. Just finished school. A mate's 18th birthday party, and I rocked up 20 minutes late, starving. And I said to my mate, "What do you got?" I'm starving. He says, "I got just the thing for you, Fraser." knowing I'm straighty 180, like I'm just a simple farming kid. And he gives me this plate of hash cookies, and I got no idea that I'm eating hash cookies. And I'm high on life anyway. And so having a great time. And then 2 weeks later, I do my final interview, get a blood test and a urine test. And I can still very clearly remember the officer sitting me down and saying, "So, son, when was the last time you experimented with marijuana?" I said, "No, I haven't." He said, "Well, the tests don't lie, so you're out."
Oh,
done.
No way.
So it was an incredible moment in my life, because it was like, oh, wow, that was my whole hope. That was my future. That's what I was going to do. So extraordinarily, a couple of weeks after that, I met Catherine, who you knew. I had an experience at a youth camp that changed my life in terms of what I thought about destiny and thought about what I wanted to do. And in the end, decided to go to Bible college, and just felt a really strong sense of, I think there's something bigger for my life than the army. And I never saw it, but now I do. So anyway, long story short, ended up training for ministry, did a degree in theology, got a job as a youth pastor in my church, and then a short time later was given the opportunity to be the senior pastor at 23.
23, mate. That is young to take on a congregation, 23 years old. Tell us about that. Was that a nerve-wracking experience?
It was a very nerve-wracking experience when the our senior pastor was on long service leave, and someone came in to caretake that time, and we're talking about succession, and I'm in the conversation talking about succession. We're looking around, who's going to succeed, and then he says, "No, I think it's you, Jaemin." And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like I could just imagine that being announced to the church and everyone going, what? You? Oh, see ya.
Yeah.
But anyway,
and you grew up in this town where you were pastoring as well. So it would have been like, are you sure we want the little kid Jaemin to run the show?
I know. It was all those things, things. However, people were gracious when the announcement was made and the decision that I was going to be the leader. People were like, great. Yeah. Excellent. We got confidence that you can do a good job. So It was an incredibly humbling experience, and in many ways a baptism of fire, because we had kind of a big organization. We had a Christian school and a daycare center, and I found out kind of 6 weeks into my tenure that they were trading insolvently. So it was kind of a deep dive into business as well. I had no idea what I was doing, but I could tell the difference between red and black, and that's probably all I needed early on. So so that began a period of my life where I was church pastor for 10 years, and it was all in. That was an extraordinary experience of my life. One of the interesting challenges of being pastor was, as pastor, always invited into people's world to have conversations about change, but I was always surprised at how little change I saw. I was often having the same conversations with the same people about the same things. And just this observation that Christians were looking to outsource the change work to God. If I just believe, if I just have faith, if I just pray, God will somehow magically take care of the rest. And I just thought, I'm sure there's an invitation to participate in this. I'm sure God's greatest gifts are choice and responsibility, but most people wanted to give them back. So when I got introduced to the coaching skill set by a mentor of mine, I was gobsmacked. I thought, you're kidding. Like, where have these tools been? This is a missing technology, and this belongs in an authentic spirituality. This belongs. And so I, as I tend to do, dived in boots and all, and went and did a diploma in coaching, and was just so compelled by that skill set. And in the end, just felt that was more aligned to who I was designed to be, where I was called to be, and how I could be most effective. And so resigned as my job as a pastor, handed that church over to a couple I raised up, and began a coaching business.
Wow.
And the thing about coaching, the coaching world, is there is no barrier to entry. And so literally, like, I started my coaching business 4 weeks after I began my coach training.
Right.
Because no one could tell me that I couldn't. No one said, "Oh, there's rules." No, it's just like, swing away. So It's such an interesting industry, because there are all kinds of skill sets and experience levels. It's a hyped up space. People making all kinds of outlandish promises. But nevertheless, one of the most profound skill sets I've ever come across, one of the most empowering sets of tools and frameworks. So yeah, that began my journey as a coach.
Yeah.
I've been coaching for the last 10 years.
Wow. So Jaemin, I just want to be brutally honest on the podcast here and say, we in the evangelical space, I'm gonna say that, and put that category out there. I think sometimes we struggle with this concept of life coaching, and I feel as though there's actually a negative perception towards it by a lot of people in the evangelical space. And I know a little bit of your story. I don't know the whole thing, but I think that you've probably maybe run into some of that, pushback from people in the evangelical, in the church space. Why do you think that Christians in again, I'm generalizing here, I'm not saying every Christian, why do you think that they might have that negative perception when it comes to this kind of what oftentimes people refer to as self-help or this coaching space that you now work in? And why do you see it as part of, you said before, just a moment ago, you said that it's actually a vital part of spirituality. Why do you think that?
Yeah, I certainly had some challenges in when I started to introduce the coaching ideology into some of the church space. I wrote, my first book was called 12 Coaching Conversations Every Disciple Must Have. And I thought it was a really great link, but it was not well received at all because, as you said, people kind of felt like, no, this is way too secular. This doesn't belong. Our responsibility is to have childlike faith. And I just thought, I think you're supposed to have childlike faith when you're a child, but to me, the invitation in the Gospels is an invitation to grow up into maturity, into an adult-to-adult relationship with God. And just like when I think about my own kids, I wouldn't trust my kids with the "what do you want" question when they're really young, because with that question, they'll ruin their life.
Yeah.
If I said, to my kids when they're toddlers, what do you want? Well, they're going to want fairy floss and bubble gum. Like they're going to want TV and late nights. Like they're not going to want broccoli. They're not going to want early nights. And so when they're young, it's like, hey, listen, trust and obey. Just trust me and do what I say, and it will go well with you. But if like on their 21st birthday, all I've got for them, I say, listen, just trust me and obey what I say. It's like, and never cross the road without me, and make sure you eat your broccoli, and every decision, run that by me first. Be like, there's something really weird about that dynamic. So yeah. I think, father is the metaphor used most frequently in the scriptures to describe God. And so we kind of get that is the idea that God is father, but the invitation to grow up and to have a relationship with father that's an adult one. So that requires you to take responsibility. That just like the child moving into adulthood, they got to work out some stuff for themselves. They've got to understand who they are. They've got to understand what motivates them. They've got to make some mistakes. They've got to fall on their face. They've got to understand what drives them. So I think, yeah, the reason why it feels so secular for Christians is because this idea that the most spiritual you can be is a child. I think that's a really clever hideout because, as a child, it's never your responsibility and never your fault. So I think people just kind of get in this place where it's safe to blame it all on God and wait for God to take responsibility. Then you can never get found out. So I think life requires more than that. An authentic spirituality requires, blood on your knees. You get knocked down, you fail, you miss it, but that's the only way that you learn. And that's when you find something real by, having a go yourself, taking responsibility.
Yeah. Are you talking about, Jaemin, I'd love for you to unpack this a little bit more. Are you talking about the tension then between God being sovereign and in control, but we as human beings still have responsibility and we have permission to even take control of certain things? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, there's some really interesting theological conversations here, but the way that I think about it is the garden. I think I love the Hebrew story. Before the Greco-Roman imposition on the gospel, I love the fact that in the beginning, God made heavens and the earth, and he made man in his image, and he said it was good. I think this idea of perfection is a imposition to that story. Because if you're perfect, all you can do is fall. God said they're good. Now I love thinking about that idea. What does it mean to be inherently good? You can't really say you're good unless you could have had the opportunity to be bad. It's like, you can't really say you've loved someone unless you could have hated them. Otherwise, like you had to, it's not real. Like if I'm away on a trip and I bring some flowers home for Kat and she says, "Oh, thank you. That's lovely." And I said, "Well, I didn't want to, but I was reading this book at the airport that says husbands must bring flowers home for wives." Yeah. So I didn't want to, but here, this is what I have to do. She'd like, "Well, you know what you can do with those flowers?
Yeah.
Jam them." They all of a sudden mean nothing. I think about marriage being, we're not married because of a historical decision to say yes to each other. We're here because we said yes today. And you can't say yes unless you can say no. So I think this idea of choice, this idea of God is not afraid to give us choice, because it's choice that makes us real. It's choice that makes us alive. We can do terrible things with those choices, but we can also do wonderful things. And so I love thinking about just the wonder of the design is putting responsibility and choice, two incredibly dangerous gifts, because we can do all kinds of terrible things. But when we use them to draw close to God, to be kind to ourselves and others, to bring the kingdom to the earth, then it's real, then it's powerful. So I think that's kind of the tension, this beautiful wisdom that would give us power, knowing we could make a mess of it, but knowing there was no other way for it to be real. So I love exploring what does it mean to use the power we've been given well. And that means owning who we are and understanding how we work and taking full responsibility to do well with the gift we've been given.
Yeah. Listen, mate, I want to kind of transition a little bit to your book now, and talk about the book. You start off the book with a series of stories of individuals that have been faced with some challenges or some struggles, let's call them. And I feel as though you, and intentionally I'm assuming, really talk about each of those struggles, and there's a variety of them, from financial to physical, relational, work, all sorts of different parts of our human experience. But you really bring it back to talking about and I think you're setting up the case that the root problem of all of these challenges, and perhaps the common root problem of humanity's challenges, is this idea of insecurity, which I know you're passionate about. You're founder of the Insecurity Project. If that's the case, if I'm reading that correctly, number one, why do you feel as though that is the root problem of all of these human challenges that you introduce in the book?
Yeah, well, I do think it is the root challenge. I think the way that we're designed is that what we believe shapes our experience of life. And so typically when you explore someone's belief system, there's a whole bunch of really interesting limiting beliefs, and specifically limiting beliefs about themselves. People form really interesting opinions of whether they're good enough, whether they're worthy of love, whether they're inadequate. And those opinions become beliefs, and those beliefs generate evidence to prove that they're true, and they become the construct we live out of. And so they impact every area of our life. I'm convinced that behavior is just the end of the assembly line out of the factory of our beliefs. So I love the personal development space, but often it's a behavior management conversation. It's always dealing with the end product. So people see pain. People try and fix the problems in their life where they see the pain show up. So they see pain in their finances. They imagine it's a money problem, or they see pain in their relationships. It is a relationship problem. I'm not enjoying work. It must be a work problem. But when you kind of turn the lights on and explore what's going on at the deepest level, you kind of really uncover that underneath all of that, there's some fear of being found out as inadequate, some opinion that they're not good enough, some belief that they don't deserve love. That's underpinning that and really driving that surface dysfunction.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I answered your question. Did I sum that up enough?
No, you nailed it. Yeah, no, that's perfect. I'd love for you to unpack, Jaemin, then this idea around, and you mentioned this just a moment ago, about this childlike faith that people oftentimes refer to in Christianity, and it's almost seen as like a goal to aspire to. And yet there's also this concept that we find later on in the New Testament through the writings of Paul, where he talks a lot about growing into full maturity, into full spiritual maturity. So can you unpack for us the idea of maturing into adulthood fully, and how does that tie into your biblical worldview? Like, how does that work for emotional human beings, and how do they become, I guess, mature emotionally and live that out?
Yeah, it's a really great conversation, and a tricky one at times, because I think as Christians believe that independence is the root of all sin. So to kind of wander off and do your own thing, that's sin. However, the journey to maturity goes through the waters of independence. Like, it was Stephen Covey who said, the journey to maturity goes from dependence to independence to interdependence.
Yes.
So you start out dependent on everyone and everything, but then you kind of work out how to do some stuff for yourself. In fact, you work out how to do everything for yourself. That's not the highlight of maturity. That just means you come then with your cup full so that you can have interdependent relationships. So when I was pastor, I remember reading that from Covey and just going, "You're kidding. We do dependence so well. We get this childlike thing, we nail it. Like, people come in to a Christian experience as a child, dependent on everything. Just trust God, lean not on your own understanding, and trust your pastor to interpret what God's saying to you. But we're not very good at the next step. Like, we create these systems of dependence and people never grow up. So,
which is why, Jaemin, I think there is a frustration for pastors that it doesn't matter how many programs you put on for people, they will always desire yet another program, another Bible study, because they've never learned how to feed themselves. And then I think, Jaemin, that in Covey's terms, they never learn to feed each other in the interdependence. Like, they may actually learn how to do a Bible study for themselves and maybe start to feed themselves, but it's that discipleship of interdependence where it breaks down. But anyway, I digress. And I jump into the frustrations of many pastors.
I agree, but I don't know whether I would do, like, I got so frustrated by that, and so just so intrigued by this idea of maturity and how I could facilitate maturity as a leader, that I kicked everyone out of church for 3 months. So I literally closed the doors for 3 months and said, "We're not going to do this anymore, because this is really weird, and I'm facilitating you to remain as babies, and I'm not playing that game."
There wasn't a global pandemic to blame either at the time.
No. And it was a really interesting experience, because I was just like, this is the most loving thing I could do as your leader, is to say, "Hey, listen, you got to work out some stuff on your own, not because your pastor tells you, not because you can go to a small group or a Bible study. You got to work out whether you still want to be a disciple just because that's what you decide to do. And you got to take some responsibility for your own journey. There's no other way. And if I keep having these systems, well, you'll say these words, I'm doing my own thing, but then nothing will really happen." So anyway, I kicked everyone out for 3 months. Not many people came back when I opened the church, by the way. But it was an amazing experiment, just to kind of go, we got to find a way to grow up, because the invitation is to maturity. And I think this childlike faith, it sounds so spiritual and sounds so noble, but it is a hideout. And it is an insecurity hideout too, because the deep fear is, well, what if I get it wrong? What if I fail? What if I'm not capable of running my own life? What if I make horrible mistakes? What if I hurt myself and others? I'm just going to shut it down and remain as a child. And so to me, that is, it's a strange decision, but a foolish decision, and an ungrateful decision, because to me, the gifts of choice and responsibility are the most precious things we've ever been given. And to give them back and say, "I prefer to live with blame and excuse and the illusion of no choice, thanks very much," is to squander life itself, is to squander the wonder of what we've been given. So sure, you can make some mistakes, doing your own thing. Of course, that's the only way you learn. You know that as a parent, you watch your kids, you can't prevent them from making mistakes. You wouldn't want to. Yeah. So God, the same with us. You got to try some stuff. You got to understand your own thinking. And off the back of that, to then grow up and then contribute meaningfully. Each part bring their gifts. You can only bring your gift if you've worked out what your gift is and owned that and grown into maturity in that. So
Yeah.
big
I
challenge,
love,
but an
I
important one.
love that. I love the fact that you talk about, two of the greatest gifts we've been given as human beings are these gifts of choice and responsibility. It reminds me of, I actually have sitting on my desk a little book, Viktor Frankl's
Wow.
Man's Search for Meaning. And he talks about the fact that, humans, unlike animals, actually have this ability to choose and make decisions. And he talks about it in light of circumstances happening to us, and we get the choice to respond to those circumstances. Our response is not forced upon us, but we actually have a responsibility to it. You said something, Jaemin, just a moment ago. You said that we shouldn't squander the gifts and abilities that we've been given. And I love what you're doing in this Insecurity project. And I love what you talked about in the book, that we actually have a responsibility as human beings to the world to solve this insecurity problem. Can you unpack what you mean by that? What do you mean by this responsibility, and what do you mean by not squandering that responsibility?
Well, firstly, I think about the parable of the talents. I think it's a really interesting story on a number of levels, but to me, the takeaway from that is our responsibility is to grow what we've been given. Don't worry about what anyone else is given, but we have been each given gifts, and when it's all said and done, you will be held accountable for what you did with what you were given, and most importantly, did you grow it? Did you explore the outer limits of what was possible with what you were given? So that is a responsibility for growth. That is a responsibility to go, I can't stay here. I can't just bunker down for the sake of fear of what I might lose, which is the insecurity problem. What if I show up and bring my best and my best is not good enough, and then I'll be found out? So what I'm going to do is not do anything. I'm just going to defer to someone else's wisdom, trust someone else's judgment. It serves someone else's agenda. Also, it's not my responsibility. But that is a foolish decision, and one that you'll be sad that you made. So I think, insecurity causes each of us, inherently beautiful, wonderful, creative people, to make decisions that hurt ourselves and each other. It's our insecurity that causes us to be tribal and selfish and greedy and needy. Like it's unattractive and unkind. The people who do the best work in the world, they show up confident that they're already enough. There's nothing to prove. There's nothing to defend. They're free to give out of the overflow of who they are. And that's not just good for them. It's not just good for their family. When you show up like that, you then bring a gift to the world. And that has an incredible ripple effect. That has an incredible impact on all those around you. And so we have some great challenges in the world today. And I think they're not technological challenges as they may have been in other eras. I think our technology is racing ahead. The great challenge is whether we will grow up as human beings, whether we will deal with our dysfunction, whether we will develop our capacity to show up with maturity and confidence and security. I think that is the great challenge on the world today, because it's our insecurity that causes us to rape and pillage the planet and drive into consumerism deeper and deeper to make sure we meet our own needs, for fear that we'll miss out. But it's the secure person who's free to show up and give and contribute rather than take.
Jaemin, it sounds a lot like you are inviting people into a process of doing what some people would refer to as deep work. What would you say to the person that just says, hey, I'm too old, or I'm too far gone, or quite frankly, Jaemin, I just don't know if I want to go on the journey of doing that kind of hard work to deal with some of these deeper issues in my life? What would you say to them?
Well, interestingly, practice 5 out of the 7 in my book is to get help from someone who doesn't care about you. So I would say, you will not hear me pleading with you. You will not hear me wanting for you. You will not hear me trying to convince you anything. That is of zero value. In fact, it's worse than zero value. It's counterproductive, because that positions me as the expert in your life and to give you advice and tell you what to do. The internal response when someone tells you what to do is, hey, you're not my mom. Stop telling me what to do.
Yeah.
So I think There are some people who will never deal with this. In fact, a lot
Yeah.
of people will never face their fears and deal with their insecurity.
Yeah.
However, for those who have ears and eyes and are ready, beautiful. Here, there's a framework, there's tools, there's a way of entering into a process for doing deep work that produces lasting change. And
Yeah.
so I've positioned myself to serve those who are ready, and rather than to kind of try and convince the unwilling or those who will never be ready. That's my decision about where I can be most effective.
I think you talked about in your book the idea of layering pain, and that the fact the fact is that many people will never do this deep work because, quite frankly, the pain will supposedly not become great enough for them. But once the pain does become great enough where they just can't keep going the way that they're going, that oftentimes leads to people looking for a guide or looking for somebody to help them make the changes and do the deep work that they need to do.
Yeah. I mean, well, pain is a gift. It's a beautiful gift. It's designed to move us away from danger towards safety. But the interesting thing about pain is we have the ability to suppress it and ignore it and pretend it's not there. And just because something's killing us doesn't mean we have to pay attention to that fact.
Yeah.
Smoking cigarettes is an incredibly accurate example of that.
Yeah.
However, if you did pay attention to the cost, if you did pay attention to the fact it was killing you, if you did pay attention to all the ways it was ruining your life, then you create such a high pain association, then the pain of change becomes less than the pain of staying the same. I think insecurity is just the same. Lots of people are ignoring it, pretending it's not costing them. It's the new normal. It's just how things are. They've lost sight of their vision. They look around at a bunch of other people who are just as insecure, and it's just kind of like, oh, well, it is what it is.
Yeah.
However, if you turn the lights on and did an accurate cost assessment and say, hang on a minute, this opinion I've got of myself, this fear of inadequacy, it's impacting every single area of my life, and that cost is only compounding. I could get to the end of my life and die with the music inside me. I could get to the end and have disappointments and regrets that I never actually lived. That is horrible. That's incredibly painful. Great. Well, now you've got pain serving you because, just like when you put your hand on the fire and that pain says, take your hand off the fire so you don't ruin your hand. So feeling this pain that insecurity is costing you is super useful because that pain drives you to take whatever necessary action to make a change and do the deep work so that you can solve this problem.
And if somebody's listening to this podcast and they're going, man, this is such an aha moment. You said something just a moment ago, Jaemin, people get to the end of their life and the music's still inside of them. We desperately want to hear that music. Like the world needs to hear that music. We don't want to go through life and have that music never get out to the world. You talk about music. I'm a huge fan of music. I love listening to music. And I just imagine, what if for me, I'm a huge fan of a guy named James Taylor. What if James never overcome his fear and never put out all of the albums and all the records and things? What a gift would have been missed for the world. And I'm sure somebody's listening to this, and it may not be music, it may be something different, but there's a gift inside of you that the world desperately needs if you could just overcome that insecurity and fear.
100%. One of my clients at the moment is a pain specialist, an end-of-life pain specialist. And he's working with me now because his observation around the kind of pain people are dealing with at the end of their life, he says, it might surprise you, Jaemin. You might think it's physical pain that's causing the most suffering. It's not. It's existential pain. It's the pain of regret and disappointment of a life unlived. And he watches people every day just suffer with the music inside them. And he was like, if I don't make some change now, I will never put out the stuff that's inside me. He's got great dreams to make all kinds of interesting contributions. And so, cool. It's time to deal with these beliefs that says I can't, or I'm not good enough, or I shouldn't, or what if people don't like it? Because then I'll die with the music inside me. And I agree that would be a tragedy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a question for you around the 7 practices that you outline in your book. And I don't want you to go through all of them. People need to grab a copy of the book for themselves, and we'll give them information on how they can do that at the end, because you've been super generous in making it available to people, which so thankful for that. But you outline throughout each of the 7 practices, or I should say there's a theme throughout each of the 7 practices of this idea of story
Mm.
and these narratives or these scripts that we live by. In fact, you claim that story is the thing that is the only thing that we have as humans. Unpack what you mean by that. Story is the only thing that we have, and how does that play into our struggle with insecurity?
Yeah, it's a very unsettling idea. I can remember being sideswiped by that idea when I first came across it, and it unsettled me for at least a month that all we have is story. I'm like, that's way too wishy-washy and grey and abstract. However, the exploration of how we are designed as human beings is that we are sense-making creatures. Mm-hmm. So we go into the world and we tell stories about our experience. And 5 people all having the same experience, it turns out they're not having the same experience at all. They're all having their own experience because they're all telling a different story and they're all attaching different meaning to different parts. So
it sounds a lot like the 4 Gospels that people sometimes get hung up on in the life of Jesus. Sure. Same story, but 4 different experiences, 4 guys 100%. Giving making sense of it. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So I think that the really interesting way of breaking this down is to explore the sense-making questions that really shape our experience. So we go into life, and the moment we have conscious awareness, we are asking and answering 2 questions for every experience. And those questions are, why did this happen? And what does it mean about me? And those questions are being asked in moments of pain, especially as a child. So parents get divorced. Why is this happening? What does it mean about me? Get bullied. Why is this happening? What does it mean about me? Have to move schools. Why is this happening? What does it mean about me? Like, you don't get picked for the soccer team. Why is this happening? What does it mean about me? All this stuff, all the complexity of life growing up as a child, we have to attach meaning. And it's the meaning, it's the stories told by 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds and 8-year-olds that often then go unreviewed for the rest of our life, that create the story we live out of. And so a great example is the Truman Show. I love that movie.
Yeah.
Because he's a guy who's unaware that he's living out of a script. He thinks he's living his best life, but it's in a dome. It's a narrative that someone else has designed for him. Everyone else is paid actors. And it's such a great metaphor because that accurately describes most people's experience of life. They're living their life unaware that it's a story, unaware that it's a script, and unaware that they wrote the script. That's the most amazing thing. Like, to discover we're not the actor in the story, we're the storyteller. Yeah. And we're living out of a script we wrote for ourselves when we were 4 years old. It's staggering because it just means, my goodness, no wonder why it's so messy and there's so many limitations. A 4-year-old, even on their best day, is going to write a strange story, let alone on their worst day. So the ability to use the pen and paper accurately and write beautiful stories for ourselves that allow us to move forward is a big part of being the adult and growing up.
And you go into the book, you talk about actually going back to the earliest beginnings of some of the stories that we've written, because without going back to the very beginning of where that story started, it's impossible for us to rewrite that script or to rewrite that story in a healthy way. I heard recently, Jaemin, somebody talking about feelings that were never finished and having to go back and deal with feelings that were never fully finished. Is that what you're talking about?
I like to think about it as reviewing the data. So I like being scientific because often the personal development space feels really abstract and hard to pin down and very subjective.
Yeah.
I just think, no, we're storytellers. We have a story. So our life is determined by the quality of the story we tell. So let's go back and review the data around why we wrote that story at that particular time and why we thought that was true. And just review how accurate it was. Like, I'm sure we've all had times where we've had opinions about something and we've actually shone the light on that opinion and had some more data and gone, oh my goodness, I've reviewed the data and that's that opinion's not accurate anymore.
Yes.
I used to think that the round cycling track was called a velodrome, and I was convinced that was true for a number of years until someone heard me say it out loud and laughed at me and said, no, Jaemin, it's a velodrome. Like, I'm pretty sure you're wrong. But anyway, and then I found out, it turns out they're right. It is a velodrome with a V.
Not a melodrome with a V.
Not a velodrome. Yeah. But so that data went, this picture in my mind of how this looks and how it sounds is not accurate. So, okay, I'll update that story. And now it's a velodrome. So,
Yeah.
you
So
know, for a kid,
velodrome, Jaemin, velodrome versus melodrome, pretty inconsequential. Talk to me about a script that you would say had massive consequences that you had to go back and rewrite.
Well, I moved my family to Germany for 9 months in 2016 off the back of a business experiment to see if I could be location independent. I'd read the 4-hour work week, thought, my goodness, time, money, mobility. If I could work out how to deliver my coaching online, well, I could be anywhere in the world and have clients anywhere in the world. So somehow we pulled it off, moved the family to Germany for 9 months. And I got onto the plane with one person signed up to my first online coaching program for $495 and no plan B. And so it was all great until I ran out of money halfway through that experience. And then it was very painful. But in the exploration of how it was that I'd run out of money, I reviewed some stories that I'd told myself about money, because to the logic part of my brain, it was like, this is impossible. I'm 110% committed to business growth. I'm really good at what I do. People love what I do. How is it that I have no money? This is really, really crazy.
Yeah.
So I went back and explored the story that I'd told myself about money. And I realized that growing up in the family that I had been part of, my parents modeled to me that you can't be rich and godly. And so every rich person we knew was a bad person. Every poor person was a good person. And so this idea that money will corrupt you and you can't be rich and godly. And so not blaming my parents, because my brother certainly never picked up on that story. But I decided that was true. So I agreed.
Yes.
I bought into that. I went, yeah, that's an accurate description of how the world works. And so unconsciously, the story I'd created was, Jaemin, you can't handle money. Money will corrupt you. You get more money, you'll become a bad person. You'll leave your wife. You'll treat people poorly. You become selfish and greedy. And so therefore I'm resisting money. I'm creating a scenario where I'm sabotaging any opportunity to get ahead financially because of that story. And so reviewing it and going back and exploring the data around why I decided that was true, and seeing, is there any other way of thinking about this? I decided there was. I decided there was plenty of other ways of thinking about money. And I specifically rewrote the story to say, I'm not sure that money corrupts anyone. I think money just magnifies what's in your heart. I think insecurity corrupts people. I think it's the fears we have about ourselves that causes us to be dysfunctional. So if I'm dealing with that, well, then I think that my intention is to do good and to be good. So money will just give me more scope to do that. So rewrote that story, and in the space of 3 weeks, earned more money than I had the previous year. Doing the same work. It was just an extraordinary thing. It was like I just all of a sudden opened the window that had been closed, because now it was safe. Now it was safe to earn money because I decided that money wasn't going to corrupt me anymore and I could handle it. So that was a really powerful example of rewriting a story based on examining the data.
So, Jaemin, unpack that a little bit more for me, because I want to get into a little bit granular. Help me. I don't want to nerd out on this, but I am going to geek out on this a little bit. So you rewrote the script. What did that do then on a practical level in this specific scenario? When you rewrote the script, how did that play out in actions?
Sure. So it meant I upped my prices. That was one of the really interesting things, because I'd always had this really weird pricing struggle. Like, I'm good at what I do, but I hate really charging for it, and people can't afford it. And so this weird conversation around sales, around putting an accurate price on my products and service. So I think one of the first things was that I doubled my price straight away, and just thought, hang on a minute, this is a really, really significant problem I'm helping people solve. It's a problem I've worked my whole life to solve. I'm not sure of anyone else who's solving it as well as I'm solving it at the moment. So I'm 100% confident that I'm giving more value than I'm charging for, and this is a problem that is, very valuable to solve. So I did some accurate work, to decide what I was worth, and then came to the market and said, okay, this is what I'm worth, and I'm confident about that. So that in itself made a massive difference in the nature of my sales conversations. And it just, there was a whole bunch of subtle sabotage that was going on that I didn't even notice. around money, around the decisions I was making with money that meant I was never getting ahead. So all of those just stopped because I didn't need to be doing them anymore. I didn't need to sabotage. And so there really wasn't much change in output and activity. It just was, it was safe all of a sudden. It was safe for me to gain more money. And so I love thinking about money as a construct. You know, it looks so concrete, but if 10 people in a circle all pulled out their wallet and put a $50 note down, it might look that they're all the same, but they're not the same. They're all different. Yeah. Because those $50 represent something different to every single person. Their relationship with that $50 is different. So, that was a really important distinction to change my own money story. And then off this very similar output, then it was safe to get more money, and then the money flowed.
Yeah. Yeah. Money absolutely, certainly is not an emotionally neutral topic. In fact, anybody that's listening to this podcast or watching the YouTube video right now, as they're listening to you talk about this, there are emotions coming up inside of them, whether they agree with what you're talking about or disagree. It's not emotionally neutral. And so I love, though, that you said that it's only these things are just going to magnify what's already in your heart. And really what you're talking about, I believe, is this idea of what's really motivating. The motivation is the problem, not the money. That's the difference.
I agree. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about this idea that you bring up in the book of really what motivates people. Well, in most cases, people have heard of the term self-discipline, and they've heard for years, you just got to discipline yourself. If you want to lose weight, or if you want to do well with money, you just got to have more discipline with your budget. All these things and problems and challenges that we face as humans, oftentimes we're told, just have more self-discipline. And so, personal development space, probably that's their go-to is this self-discipline thing. You argue, though, in your book that self-permission is a far better strategy to see real lasting change in your life. So can you explain the difference between those two things and why you think self-permission is far greater than self-discipline?
Yeah, sure. One important distinction, I think the transition is the kind of midlife transition, because for young people, self-discipline is probably still working really well.
Yeah.
But the kind of thing is, it's the only tool in the shed for most people. It's culturally celebrated as everything. We hear interviews from people who've succeeded, and they tell us, look, you put your mind to anything and work hard, you can achieve. So the problem with that is people midlife feel exhausted and feel discouraged because they think, man, I know I need to just try harder and just be better and just get it done. But my goodness, so many failed attempts at that strategy. So I think the problem with self-discipline is that it's based on the presupposition that there's a fat, lazy, recalcitrant part of you that doesn't want to succeed, and you have to dominate or kill or suppress that part to win. So it's a really brutal, unkind strategy against your own self to kind of fight yourself to win. I think to really take a step back and do some self-awareness, you realize that all resistance is loving. We're only getting in our way because we're afraid of being found out. So if you have a conversation about insecurity, you can get to the point of working with yourself rather than against yourself. And I see the people who really succeed are the people who have reconciled their own doubts, fears, and insecurities, and off the back of that have then gone, cool, well, there is full permission to show up at my best where it matters most. So that's a really beautiful and long-term motivation source, because you have everything pointed in the same direction. There's no war going on inside. So I think it's pretty countercultural and very counterintuitive. But if you're open to a different way of thinking, I think it gives you a massively unfair advantage in life if you can understand self-permission rather than self-discipline.
Yeah, so good. So good. Well, listen, I would love to know who has been an influential voice in your life through this journey that you're talking about in the book, but also just to be able to share with people some of the resources that you've found helpful. I think that obviously Unhindered, the book, is going to be a fantastic resource for people to get a hold of, and we'll talk about how they can do that in just a second. But who are some of the influences that have shaped you, Jaemin, that might be helpful for other people to check out?
Yeah, sure. I love Jordan Peterson. I think he's the smartest man in the world at the moment. His 12 Rules for Life. Every time I listened to that audio book, it felt like my soul was being nurtured. I
Yeah.
just thought, what beautiful wisdom. Don Miguel Ruiz, The Four Agreements. I listened to that on a plane last year and had a deeply spiritual experience sitting in that seat. And I'm sure the guy next to me was feeling exactly what was going on for me, because it was a whole body experience, which is, I think, what's supposed to happen when you encounter wisdom. I think wisdom is supposed to affect every cell inside you. And so the description around the agreements that we make with words and with life, just stunning.
Yeah.
Stephen Covey, I think he said it first and said it best in so many ways. So in terms of mentors, Greg Bellingham, he was the pastor that gave me the nod at 23. He mentored me through that role. He became a dear friend. He then introduced me to the coaching skill set. And it's continued to play a massive role in my life in terms of the difficult conversations, the self-awareness when I had blind spots, the high quality questions that have led me into a bigger space. So yeah, he's been a wonderful mentor and friend and coach over the years.
Yeah. Jaemin, can you unpack for me that experience on the plane with the Four Agreements? I would love.
Yeah, well,
you said it was a deeply spiritual experience. What do you mean by that?
Well, I love thinking about wisdom, because I think there's lots of stuff that masquerades as wisdom, but there's a passage in Proverbs that wisdom is justified by her children. So to me, that means wisdom bears fruit. It's like when you walk down the street and you see some kids, and you're like, oh, they obviously came from those parents. So I think wisdom has to hit the ground and produce something different. That's how you know it's wisdom. It's eternal. It's universal. It's life-giving. It's transformative. And so that the subtitle of that book is The Four Agreements, a book of wisdom. Like, cool, we'll try this out. So I open this book, and the words hit me. They don't just hit me in the face. They hit me in the soul. They impact me. They challenge me. They move me, and they open me. They open me to something that I'm longing for. And so I feel like I'm communing with God. I feel like I'm having stuff wash over me that is transforming my life, that I'll never be the same again, because I've understood some stuff about myself, about the agreements that I've made and how to change those agreements. And so, it was a glorious experience. Like, I love being a human being. I think, I just think what an extraordinary gift it is to be human, and the range of experiences we get to have, like, and the joy and the deep moments of flow, all extraordinary. And so that book it took me into a deep space very, very quickly, and I surrendered to it. I didn't resist that. I went, well, I'm in this, and I'm just, like, when time slows down and you're just totally focused and present, and you're just having an emotional experience and very meaningful thing. So yeah, that's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, listen, mate, this has been a fantastic and a fun conversation, and I have thoroughly enjoyed the book. I actually am on my second round of reading through it, because I think the 7 practices are so incredibly helpful. I love the fact, Jaemin, that you actually give a framework for people to be able to work through these things. Like you said before, I think sometimes the self-help space, or, some of this stuff that, people would maybe categorize this in, can be a little bit gray and a little bit squishy. But I just really appreciate the fact that you've given a real framework for people to process these things and to work through the issue of insecurity. Because one of the things that I feel like it did for me was, as I was reading the book, and I shared this with you before, I feel like it gave permission for me to say, hey, we all have insecurity. Yeah. It's a universal problem. Talking about a story from my childhood, I remember my parents saying to me, or not even to me, but I just remember overhearing them say, that person, fill in the blank, struggles with insecurity, almost like it was a disease, like diabetes or something. And so I just imagined to myself, well, then that's the worst possible thing you could possibly have. And so you would never want to ever admit, certainly not publicly on a podcast, that you struggle with fear and insecurity, but the permission to be able to say, yes, this is a human issue. It's a universal problem, but there is a solution to it, and you don't have to be held back from it. So thankful that you put pen to paper and put it into words. Really appreciate that. How can people get a hold of you, Jaemin, if they'd like to connect with you online, and how can they get a hold of the book and the resources that you make available?
Yeah, well, when I launched the Insecurity Project, my business coach said, no, that's the wrong name. You can't have that name. You're supposed to pitch the prize, not the problem. So people are insecure about being insecure. So that's too vulnerable a word. But what he didn't anticipate was it was kind of an SEO masterstroke, because no one else in the world has kind of been that overt with that one word. So to answer your question, it's very easy to find me, actually. You Google overcoming insecurity, or the Insecurity guy or the Insecurity Project, and I pop up. So so the Insecurity Project, search that on my podcast, so on iTunes or Spotify, on YouTube, my website. And to find the book, the Unhindered, the 7 Essential Practices for Overcoming Insecurity, go to unhinderedbook.com, and you can get a free copy anywhere in the world plus postage. So my intention is to get that framework into people's hands, because people suffer greatly for not knowing how to fix this problem. And I'm sure it's just like any other problem. You can fix it. All you need is the proven framework and someone skillful enough to hold you in the space until it works.
Hey, mate, final question, and we'll wrap up with this. If you had to pick the top 3 practices that you use personally, whether it's daily rhythms or weekly or monthly or seasonal rhythms, what are the top 3 rhythms that you use that really help to keep your soul healthy and to keep your mind in the right space as you're on this journey?
Okay, top 3. I have a nap after lunch almost every day. And I go for a full sleep cycle. So I've got a 90-minute window blocked into my calendar for a nap. So it feels just so lovely. It feels so kind. And I deeply enjoy those naps. So when I decided that was going to be part of my world. Sorry. Yeah, it is. It is.
Yep.
It is. And it's beautiful for my soul. I start the day with a lap around my water tank. So laps around my water tank. So in the book, one of the frameworks I use is story, state, strategy. So beginning with the story and the ritual, the rhythm is aligning myself to a beautiful story to start my day. Rather than starting with strategy, what do I need to do? It's who am I again? And how's this story go? And knowing that I'm the one writing it. So I go out on that water tank and I remind myself about what I agree to. What are my agreements? Where am I taking this thing? And that's a really beautiful ritual and very life-giving. And when I'm aligned to a beautiful story, the world opens up, and then I'm able to go do good work. And the third thing, I would say it's the breakfast that I have. Like I could eat breakfast for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but I just take care with my breakfast. Like I cook poached eggs on sourdough, a bit of avo and some spinach leaves, and have a nice coffee, and just take time to enjoy the experience of breakfast. So I love that rituals are so subjective. What's good for one might be really annoying for someone else. But those 3 things just, I don't know, they help me have a very human experience. They align me to a really compelling story, and they help me care for my soul so that I don't, achieve goals and lose my soul in the process. I think I see people do that all the time. And I think I love the whole theme of this podcast and that intention, because what a disastrous thing. What would it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? What a disaster. So
so good. So good. Well, thanks, mate, for taking an hour of your time to be on the podcast. So appreciate it, mate. And we'll get into the show notes all the ways that you can connect with Jaemin, and also how you can get a copy of this great new book that he's just put out, Unhindered. Thanks again, mate.
Thanks so much.